Hello and welcome. Today's session focuses on the Autumn 2024 Chief Examiner Report for the T-Level in Digital Business Services. We'll specifically look at the core papers A and B. So we'll explore how students performed in both core paper A and core paper B, focusing on what went well, where development is needed, and how we can adapt our teaching to raise attainment. Paper A covered business context, digital environment and learning strategies, while Paper B focused on tools, testing, legislation and data analysis. So first we'll start by looking at some of the key themes from core Paper A. In Paper A, students generally performed well when identifying straightforward or familiar digital concepts. For example, in question 1 and question 2, which covered eye strain and black hat hackers, this saw high levels of accuracy. These recall-based questions were answered confidently by the majority of students. Question 6, which focused on the psychological impact of digital technology, was another positive area. While not all students developed their responses fully, many demonstrated an awareness of the topic and achieved at least partial marks. Now moving to question 8, students were able to identify external factors affecting a business, such as economic or environmental influences, and some gave detailed expansions that secured full marks. One of the strongest performances came from question 11, an extended response requiring students to evaluate the potential of digitalisation. Here, higher scoring students structured their answers well, linked back to the scenario provided, and offered justification for their views, achieving band 3 marks as a result. Overall, strong responses in Paper A were clear, well structured, and showed confident recall of foundational digital business knowledge. So, while there were clear strengths in Paper A, several areas emerged where students consistently struggled. Firstly, scenario-based questions, such as question 3B, 5B and question 9, often received misunderstood or overly generic responses. In many cases, students failed to link their answers to the context provided, which limited their ability to access higher marks. A particular weakness was seen in questions 13 and 14, where students showed a limited understanding of digital inclusion and safeguarding principles. Responses tended to be vague or unrelated to the specific digital focus of the questions. In two-part questions, such as question 6 and question 10, while students often identified the correct initial point, they failed to expand or develop their answers, meaning valuable marks were left on the table. There were also difficulties in applying key frameworks. For example, in question 7 and in question 5, students struggled with concepts like smarter goal setting and usability, often giving surface-level definitions rather than contextual applications. And finally, across several extended response questions, many students did not demonstrate a secure command of higher-level skills, such as evaluate or analyse. Instead, answers were descriptive, lacked structure, and missed opportunities for critical judgment or balanced arguments. This kept them in lower mark bands. Improving confidence with command verbs and encouraging structured responses will be key to raising attainment in future series. This visual data graph demonstrates which questions were high performing in green and which were low performing in red. So we'll start by focusing on the low scoring questions. So question 3. Students struggled to explain how digital ticketing impacts society. Many gave vague or business-focused answers instead of addressing societal effects, and there was therefore limited scenario contextualisation. Question 5B. Few students demonstrated how to follow or apply client guidelines. Again, responses were often generic and lacked reference to the scenario provided. For question 9 around digital footprints, many students gave general definitions without depth, and most did not relate their answers to the specific case of signing up to mailing lists, and scenario application was weak. Question 13. Students confuse digital inclusion with general social inclusion, so answers were not focused on the digital context, therefore limiting marks. And question 14, around digital inclusion and the Equality Act. In Part A, there was poor understanding of what digital inclusion means, and in Part B, some listed examples of compliance but failed to explain them, so overall answers lacked clarity and expansion. Now, in terms of the high performing areas, in question 6, regarding psychological impact of digital technology, students successfully named and expanded on mental or emotional impacts, for example, stress and fatigue. Strong answers linked to the scenario and showed depth of understanding. And in question 8, regarding external factors affecting a business, many could accurately identify external influences like economic or legal factors, and high-scoring answers included well-developed expansions and scenario relevance. And then question 11, in the evaluation of digitalisation questions, this extended response question where students evaluated how digitalisation could benefit a business. Band 3 answers addressed all elements of the scenario, justified conclusions and structured reasonings really stood out. One of the key patterns that emerged from paper A was around how students handled the demands of the questions, especially those involving higher order skills. Firstly, many students lost marks by misreading or misinterpreting command verbs. Words like explain, analyse and evaluate were not always understood clearly, leading to answers that didn't meet the depth expected. Another important factor was scenario relevance. Students often provided generic or disconnected responses instead of applying their knowledge to the specific situation described in the question. This made it difficult to award marks for application or context. We also saw that superficial responses, especially in two-part questions or extended answers, resulted in missed opportunities. Where expansion, reasoning or examples were expected, many students simply stated a fact and moved on. In contrast, better performing students gave answers that were structured, well justified and clearly linked to the relevant tools, methods or theories. This not only met the assessment objectives, but also helped secure marks in the higher bands. To help improve future performance, there are several key teaching strategies we can implement. First, we recommend a refresher on command words. Teaching students the difference between terms like explain, analyse and evaluate is crucial. These words signal the depth and structure required in a response. A clear understanding of what each command word demands can significantly improve the quality of answers. Next, we suggest embedding scenario-based practice into lessons. Use mock case studies to encourage students to apply their knowledge in context. This helps build the ability to tailor responses to specific situations, a key skill for higher band marks. Another effective approach is reinforcing key tools and theories. Concepts like smarter goal setting or usability factors should be taught not just in isolation, but through practical examples and business scenarios to deepen understanding and retention. Lastly, focus on exam technique. Help students understand how to use the mark allocation as a guide for how much depth to include in their response. Also, encourage them to attempt every question. Even a partial answer can earn valuable marks. Together, these strategies can help students feel more confident, structured and equipped to tackle the demands of the core exam. So now we'll move on to some of the key themes from Core Paper B. So firstly, looking at what went well. In Paper B, students demonstrated several areas of strength, particularly in questions focused on recall and structured responses. There was strong performance in identifying digital tools and components, especially in question 1 and question 4A. Students showed confidence in naming relevant features and demonstrating basic understanding. Multiple choice questions such as question 18 and question 20A also saw good outcomes. These tested recall of definitions and characteristics, and many students answered these correctly. In question 9 and 10, students showed accurate recall and understanding of technical threats and the implications of the Data Protection Act. These are foundational topics in digital business, and most students performed well when questions were clearly framed. Lastly, extended response questions, such as questions 17 and 27, were stronger when students took time to structure their ideas. Those who planned their responses, used the scenario, and provided clear justification often achieved Band 3 marks. These answers stood out for their clarity, application, and reasoning. Despite some clear strengths, Paper B also revealed a number of areas where students encountered significant challenges. One major area of weakness was the understanding of project management tools, particularly in question 5 and question 28, where students struggled to correctly explain or apply concepts like Kanban and the RACI matrix. Many responses were either incorrect or too vague to gain marks. Another common issue was the use of generic or underdeveloped responses in scenario-based questions, especially in question 11B, 23 and 24. Rather than applying their knowledge to the specific context provided, students often gave textbook-style answers that lacked relevance. In question 26, many students showed a weak grasp of cost-benefit analysis. Answers lacked the detail or structure needed to explain the concept effectively or relate it to business decision-making. Similarly, students struggled with algorithm and stakeholder tools in question 19 and 21B, often giving limited or partial responses without the required expansion or reasoning. Finally, evaluation skills were underdeveloped, particularly in extended responses like question 27. Many students described features or methods without offering any real analysis or justification, which kept them in the lower bands. So, addressing these areas through targeted teaching of business tools and evaluative writing will be essential for improving outcomes in future series. Now we'll look at the visual data graph for Paper B, again starting with the lower performance questions. So, question 5. Students gave vague or generic answers about project management tools. Few responses identified the specific characteristics or benefits of Kanban. In question 11B, responses lacked contextual application to industry standards, and students often failed to relate industry standards such as ISO to the scenario, therefore limiting AO2 marks. In question 23 and 24, around data storage and database structure, responses were often simplistic and lacked understanding. Students couldn't explain methods of storing data securely or how relational databases work, and few made links to the scenario. In question 26, there was limited or incorrect understanding of how flowcharts work, their components and their purpose. Students often described general processes but did not apply how flowcharts support digital business functions. And in question 28, there was poor understanding of the roles and responsibilities in a RACI matrix. Most students gave generic answers without referencing the scenario or showing knowledge of how it functions in practice. And now moving on to the higher performance questions. So, question 9, students showed accurate recall of digital threats, for example, malware and phishing. Many identified multiple threats and explained their impact in context. Question 10, there was a good understanding of the legal implications of non-compliance and the Data Protection Act. Responses often included relevant examples and were well explained. In question 17, evaluative responses addressed the scenario directly around user access techniques. higher band answers, compared methods, and justified their effectiveness using scenario details. In question 18, there was high accuracy on the recall of digital components, for example, hardware or software tools. Students were confident in naming and describing components. And then in question 20A, around computational thinking definitions, there was clear and correct definitions of pattern recognition and decomposition. Most students scored full marks due to concise and accurate recall. Paper B reveals some recurring patterns in student performance that are worth highlighting. One of the biggest challenges continues to be evaluation and justification. Across the board, students struggle to go beyond simple description. Many responses lacked reasoning or comparison, which is essential to reach the higher bands. Another key issue was the limited familiarity with methodologies and frameworks. Tools such as Kanban or the stakeholder matrix were either misrepresented or not mentioned at all. This suggests that students need more exposure to these concepts, ideally in applied real-world contexts. We also saw that students often failed to apply their knowledge to the scenario. Even when they knew the content, they didn't relate it back to the business case or context in the question, which restricted access to AO2 marks. And finally, there were many surface-level answers, particularly in extended response questions. These responses revealed gaps in strategic thinking and subject understanding, and they often missed out on opportunities to develop or justify points. Going forward, focusing on application, structured reasoning and use of real frameworks will be crucial in improving Paper B outcomes. So, to help address the challenges seen in Paper B, there are several targeted strategies we recommend. First, it's important to teach project management tools like Kanban and the RACI matrix through case studies. By anchoring these frameworks in real business scenarios, students are more likely to understand not just what they are, but how and when to use them. Next, make a point to contextualise legislation, such as the Data Protection Act or copyright law, through practical business-focused examples. This will help students move away from simply naming laws to applying them accurately in a scenario. For written responses, particularly the extended ones, modelling is key. Use structures like the peel, scaffold, point, evidence, explain, evaluate, link to help students build reasoned and well-structured answers that meet the demands of AO3 questions. Finally, it's vital to reinforce the differences between command words. Many students struggle to distinguish between explain, analyse and evaluate, and this affects the depth of their answers. Regular practice with past paper questions and peer marking can help clarify expectations. And together these strategies will strengthen both content knowledge and exam technique, helping students access the higher bands more consistently. Now we move on to some final thoughts around assessment objectives, patterns and next steps. There were a few common pitfalls relating to the AO1 marks. So firstly, students often provided surface level recall without accurate or complete definitions, especially for acronyms or key frameworks. There was frequent confusion between similar terms such as digital inclusion versus general inclusion or threats versus legal requirements. In some cases, students failed to recall the full structure of models like the RACI matrix or the smarter goal setting framework, leading to partial or incorrect answers. So implications for teaching around these. Try to integrate retrieval practice into every lesson. You could use short quizzes, flashcards and peer questioning to reinforce definitions and model structures. Develop term comparison tasks such as this or that activities or Venn diagrams to help students distinguish between similar concepts. And use scaffolded recall strategies such as fill-in-the-blank acronym activities, flash recall grids or low-stakes quizzes to support full and accurate recall of frameworks and technical terms. And reinforce correct terminology through classroom visuals, such as mini presentations by students or teach back moments where students explain terms to peers. And now moving on to the AO2 pitfalls. So scenario-based questions, for example, question 5b, question 9 and 13, often receive generic or misapplied responses. And students struggle to contextualise knowledge, particularly when tools or risks had to be applied to real-life digital business scenarios. So some implications for teaching around these. Focus on embedding scenario-based learning frequently through case studies, mock briefs and role-play exercises. And teach students how to deconstruct a question, as in identify the focus, context and required outcome. And use what would this look like in real life prompts to practice applying theoretical knowledge to business situations. And finally, some of the common patterns arising from AO3. So many extended response questions, for example, questions 11, 17 and 27, lack structured reasoning, depth or justification. Students frequently defaulted to description rather than analysis. There was difficulty using evaluative command words such as evaluate, justify and analyse. So implications for teaching around these would be explicitly teach command word meanings with worked examples and mark scheme walkthroughs. Introduce and practice the PEAL structure, which is point, evidence, explain, evaluate and link for extended answers. And use model answers, peer marking and Band 2 versus Band 3 comparison tasks to build evaluative skills. And finally, encourage balanced arguments and conclusions in debates or written tasks. So note that overall, to improve performance across all of the AOs, it's not just about content knowledge, it's about helping students recognise the demands of the question and structure their answers accordingly. With consistent modelling, context-rich tasks and regular retrieval, we can equip learners to move confidently from recall through to application and evaluation. So to wrap up today's session, let's reflect on what we've seen and where we go from here. It's clear that students are developing good recall skills. AO1 is a relative strength, especially in short answer and multiple choice questions. However, their ability to apply knowledge in context, which is AO2, and to analyse or evaluate effectively for AO3 still need focused support. Command word misunderstanding is a recurring issue. Many students are unsure what's expected when asked to analyse or evaluate, and this continues to limit access to higher mark bands. Scenario-based and extended response questions also highlighted gaps in structure, depth and real-world application. These areas must become a key part of teaching and revision moving forward. To address this, we'll continue to embed frequent low-stakes retrieval to build AO1 confidence, but also shift more attention towards real-world case studies, structured modelling of AO3 and regular exam technique practice. Encouraging students to read questions carefully, identifying the command word and applying their knowledge in context will make a real difference. So these insights should directly inform your schemes of work, your mock planning and revision strategies, ensuring that not only the content is taught, but the learners are also prepared to use it effectively in assessments. Finally, I would appreciate it if you could take a few minutes to fill in this feedback form, please. Your insights are very valuable to us. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video today.